Hey guys, wow. You're lying there in the kind of silence that only comes after midnight, the sort of stillness that feels like the world has pressed pause. When suddenly you hear it, the crunch of boots on gravel outside your window. It's not your neighbor, not at this hour. You freeze, the sound moving closer, shadows flitting past the blinds. You probably won't survive this, at least not in the way you think, because survival isn't always about the body. Sometimes it's about the truth that slips through the cracks before someone bolts them shut. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me your location and the local time where you're watching this. I want to know where this story travels tonight. And let's go on the journey of today's story together. You push the curtain back just enough to see the convoy. Unmarked vans, armed figures, and a clipboard in one gloved hand. A midnight operation, time to avoid cameras, to avoid questions. This isn't a random sweep, it's the quiet face of expansion. Days earlier, a FOIA request you've been tracking finally dropped into your inbox. At first glance, the documents looked bureaucratic, forgettable. PDF pages with blacked out paragraphs, strange codes, procurement orders. But buried in the jargon were site coordinates, contractor bid amounts, and the phrase that froze your pulse. Phase 1, 10 facility expansion. ICE.gov's own press section would later claim it's about efficiency in detention management, a phrase as bland as it is loaded. You remember reading a ProPublica piece about how construction firms court government contracts, sometimes months before the public even knows a policy exists. Now it's playing out in real time. Somewhere in South Texas, bulldozers are already rolling, breaking ground on a temporary intake center designed to hold 1,500, but the internal memo calls it scalable. Translation: walls can grow taller, fences can stretch farther, and populations can triple without a vote in Congress. Outside your window, the engines idle low, a dog barks twice and goes quiet. Someone knocks 3 sharp raps, and your street feels like it's tilting. You're not on the list tonight, but maybe someone 2 houses down is. You scroll deeper into the FOIA drop, the hum of your desk lamp the only sound in the room. Page after page, the bland font masks the weight of what's inside. The hidden blueprint stretches beyond maps. It's a web. In one attachment, an internal ICE planning document outlines strategic facility placement near major interstate corridors, the kind that connect remote detention sites to airports used for deportation flights. You trace the dots on the map. Arizona, Louisiana, rural Pennsylvania places chosen not just for land availability, but for their distance from reporters, lawyers, and protests. Budget sheets show line items buried in broader infrastructure improvement bills, a method the Marshall Project has reported on before, how detention spending hides inside unrelated appropriations. There's a $45 million allocation for modular housing units, which sounds temporary until you notice the 15-year maintenance plan attached. You picture the buildings, rows of pale trailers behind chain link topped with razor wire, sold as a short-term fix, but built to outlast administrations. Then there's the contractor list, partially redacted. A few names survive the black marker. One is a Texas-based firm that last year donated heavily to political campaigns favoring stricter immigration laws. Another is a security conglomerate previously fined for labor violations, wage theft from its own guards. Reuters ran a quiet piece on them 6 months ago. You remember bookmarking it, wondering when they'd resurface. Now here they are, building the next generation of processing hubs. You find a floor plan labeled Pod System Efficiency Model. Each pod holds 64 detainees with a single guard station positioned for line-of-sight coverage. The cells have no windows, just vents. In the margin, a note: consider eliminating external recreation area to reduce staffing needs. You stare at it, realizing it's not just about holding more people, it's about holding them more cheaply. And then the oddest entry of all, a cultural programming annex slated for one facility in New Mexico. ICE.gov's news archive describes it as a pilot for faith-based engagement, but the FOIA file lists it under behavioral compliance measures. You don't know whether to laugh at the euphemism or shiver at the intent. This is the architecture of policy, built quietly in the shadows, and you're holding the blueprints in your hands. Maria's name doesn't appear in the FOIA files, but you know her story belongs between those black lines. You met her last spring in a cramped church basement in Fresno, the air smelling of coffee and wet coats. She was folding donated clothes for new arrivals, her dark hair pulled back, hands moving with the quiet speed of someone used to working without drawing attention. 3 weeks later, she was gone. The local news barely covered it, a one-paragraph blurb about an enforcement action at a food processing plant. But those who were there told you Maria was taken during her lunch break. No chance to collect her belongings, no goodbye to her coworkers. An ICE.gov press release later listed the raid among targeted operations, citing multiple individuals with prior removal orders. Maria had none. Her teenage son, Daniel, still keeps her phone charged, as if a notification might prove she's just delayed somewhere. He told you about the last message she sent, a picture of a new pair of cleats she'd found for his soccer tryouts. When you asked what he remembered from that day, he said it was the sound of her keys hitting the kitchen table, a sound he swears he still hears at night. Through contacts at a local legal aid group, you learn she's been moved twice, first to a county jail under contract with ICE, then to a detention center in Louisiana. The FOIA blueprint has a dot right there, marked for capacity augmentation. That means more beds, more pods, more people like Maria caught in the gears. Oddly, tucked into ICE's own news section from the week she was detained, there's a feel-good piece about an officer rescuing a stray dog during a separate operation. It's the kind of human interest filler meant to soften the edges, but reading it next to Maria's absence feels like a cruel mirror compassion displayed for an animal, while a mother is locked hundreds of miles from her child. Daniel's school counselor says his grades have slipped, but he still shows up to practice. At the last game, he wore the cleats. They were too big, but he said he didn't care. They made him feel like she was still watching. You spread Track's latest data sheets across your table, each chart another window into the machinery that swallowed Maria. The numbers are as stark as the steel doors they describe. Average detention length now stretches past 37 days, up from just 21 a decade ago. One spreadsheet shows the total detained population hovering at 36,000 on any given day, yet the FOIA expansion plan clearly anticipates room for more than 50,000. The categories tell their own story. Nearly 2/3 of detainees in the past year had no criminal convictions beyond immigration violations. A sliver had minor offenses, traffic stops, expired licenses folded into the definition of public safety threat. Track's bar graphs break it down by facility, revealing which states lean hardest into long-term holds. Louisiana, again, glows red with averages above 50 days. In another folder, you pull up ICE's public facility locator tool and notice something strange. Several of the sites marked in the FOIA blueprints don't appear on the public map yet. They're ghost facilities planned or already under construction, but invisible to anyone without clearance. A parallel map for air operations from a Migration Policy Institute report shows the flight paths linking them to deportation hubs. It's a circuit, tight and efficient. Facts pile up, contractors paid by the bed, per diem rates adjusted annually, and congressional appropriations that keep rising even as border apprehensions fluctuate. The Marshall Project documented one case where a county's economy became dependent on a single ICE contract, meaning local leaders lobbied for more detainees to keep the jobs. And then the odd fact you can't shake buried in ICE.gov's press archive from last month is a story about an officer's retirement party. Harmless on its face, but in the background of one photo, you spot an architectural rendering tacked to the wall. The caption doesn't mention it, but you recognize the layout instantly. It's one of the new pod systems from the FOIA files. These aren't just numbers, they're coordinates of policy. The data traces a slow pivot from temporary detention toward a permanent, scaled network designed to hold human beings for longer stretches, with fewer eyes watching. It's an expansion not measured in acres or dollars alone, but in the quiet normalization of holding more people for more time in more places no one talks about. You stand at the fault line where two arguments collide, each wrapped in its own moral certainty. On one side, the officials who brief the press with tight smiles and rehearsed phrases: capacity management, national security, orderly processing. They point to ICE.gov's public statements that expanding facilities will reduce overcrowding, improve conditions, and allow for timely adjudication. They bring charts showing rising case backlogs, warning of strain on local jails. In their narrative, more beds mean a more humane system space to breathe instead of packed cells. On the other side are the voices you hear in church basements, community centers, and protest lines. They quote from ACLU reports, calling expansion a false solution that entrenches detention as the default rather than investing in proven alternatives like community-based supervision. They remind you that track data shows the majority of detainees show up for court without being locked up. They see the 10 new prisons not as relief, but as cement hardening a system that already swallows thousands who pose no threat. In between, there's you hearing both, feeling neither fit. You can't unsee the FOIA files, the budget lines that outlive administrations, the scalable blueprints. You can't ignore the odd detail from a Wired article last year about biometric data collected in detention being shared with other agencies, a net cast wider than any one operation. The expansion isn't just physical, it's digital, bureaucratic, and cultural. And yet, when you speak to an ICE officer off the record, he admits something almost contradictory. I don't like the overtime, he says. I don't like moving people at 2 a.m. I just do the job they tell me to. His tone isn't cold, but weary, a reminder that systems consume their operators too. So the debate isn't just security versus rights. It's about the architecture we build when fear and policy shake hands. Do you add more bricks because the room feels crowded, or do you ask why so many are in the room to begin with? One choice reshapes skylines, the other reshapes the law. You drive through one of the towns shadowed in the FOIA files, a place where the raid vans came before dawn and left before the bakery opened. Main Street feels hollow, shop windows still dressed for a season that's already passed. The diner that once served 20 breakfasts before 7 a.m. now has 2 customers, both with their coffee refilled twice because the waitress has no other tables. The school parking lot, half empty, tells its own story. Children whose parents were taken have either moved away or stay home, afraid of strangers asking questions. At the hardware store, the owner shrugs when you ask about business. It's not just the ones they took, he says, leaning on the counter. It's the ones who left on their own, packed up in the night, no goodbye. His voice has that same mix of resignation and quiet anger you've heard in other towns after raids, anger not only at ICE, but at the silence that follows. Track data backs it up. In regions where large-scale enforcement actions took place, court filings and legal aid requests spike briefly, then drop off. It's as if the community breathes in sharply, then holds that breath indefinitely. The Migration Policy Institute has reported on self-deportation effects, families leaving to avoid the risk of detention, even without direct contact from ICE. Scrolling through ICE.gov's press feed, you find a recent post about a successful operation in a similar small town, complete with a posed photo of agents in tactical gear. What's missing are the after images you're seeing now. Boarded up storefronts, shuttered markets, and a local soccer field overgrown because the kids who used to play there are gone. In the grocery store's back aisle, you overhear 2 women debating whether to attend the town hall meeting about public safety. One says it's a waste, no one from ICE will show. The other says you go anyway, because absence is its own kind of statement. You walk out into the afternoon light, thinking about how raids don't just take people. They take the shape of a place, sanding down its edges until even the streets seem unsure who they belong to. You can't shake the image of that floor plan from the FOIA files: clean lines, efficient pods, every square foot accounted for. It sits in your mind like an X-ray of the nation's choices. 10 new prisons in a single expansion cycle. 10 new statements about what we value and what we fear. You wonder what it means when a country invests in more beds for detainees than desks for students in the same fiscal year. The numbers are easy to recite. A Migration Policy Institute brief notes that between 2020 and 2024, ICE detention funding grew by nearly 20%, while federal education spending stayed flat in real terms. The Marshall Project tracked that in certain rural counties, detention centers are now the largest employer, outpacing schools and hospitals. You think about the kids walking past those razor wire fences on their way to class, normalizing the sight before they're old enough to question it. From ICE's perspective, as stated in their official releases, expansion is framed as modernization, better facilities, upgraded medical units, improved security systems. They talk about humane detention the way a developer might pitch luxury apartments features, not foundations. But the FOIA documents don't read like a humanitarian blueprint. They read like an operations manual for permanence. Then there's the odd, almost absurd moment you stumble on while scrolling the Independent's U.S. politics section. A photo op with a senator touring one of these sites, holding a cafeteria tray like he's inspecting the day's menu. The caption praises the nutritional planning for detainees, but in the background, the steel doors are locked, and the silence tells its own story. You realize the weight of this choice isn't just in budget lines or policy briefs. It's in the cultural muscle memory we're building. Every new facility isn't just a place, it's a statement carved into concrete and rebar. It says this is how we solve problems. This is who we prepare for. And if that's the architecture of the future, you have to ask yourself, are we building safety, or are we building a future that needs more locks than keys? You picture yourself sliding the FOIA packet back into its envelope, the edges frayed from days of being thumbed through. But the story doesn't live in the paper, it lives in what you do with it now. You've walked the streets hollowed by raids, met the kids left behind, traced the data that turns lives into percentages. You've seen how the plans for 10 new prisons aren't just lines on a map, they're pressure points in the body of the country. ICE.gov will keep publishing its polished releases, framing expansion as progress. Advocates will keep filing lawsuits, citing Track's charts as proof of systemic overreach. And somewhere, construction crews will keep pouring concrete, their paychecks signed by contracts hidden in appropriations bills. That's the quiet rhythm of policy build, justify, repeat. An odd news blip crosses your feed, a local TV segment about a charity 5K run benefiting community safety initiatives, co-sponsored by one of the very contractors in your FOIA list. The runners wear t-shirts with slogans about hope and security, jogging past a fenced-off lot where a detention pod will rise by next year. It's a surreal loop, community goodwill underwriting the machinery that fractures communities. You realize that telling this story isn't about choosing sides in an abstract debate. It's about making the costs visible, human, and immediate. The numbers matter, but they need faces. The blueprints matter, but they need to be read aloud where the people they affect can hear them. So you speak directly to the person on the other side of this screen. Yes, you. This isn't just my story to tell, it's yours to carry. Share it with someone who still believes capacity expansion is a neutral phrase. Ask your local representatives why prison construction moves faster than immigration court reform. Support the groups tracking these contracts before they become concrete, because the FOIA files are only a test of transparency if we read them, talk about them, and act before the walls go up. And if you've stayed with me through every page, every street, every face, then you already know that silence is its own kind of building material. Let's choose to build something else. The air settles now, the way it does after the last truck leaves and the night folds back over a town. You imagine the maps and charts quietly sliding back into drawers, the kind of places where stories go to sleep if no one disturbs them. But you've been walking through them in daylight and moonlight, and you know they're not just paper, they're instructions. Slow down. Picture the fields you passed in Louisiana, their edges scraped raw for construction. Picture Maria's cleats, scuffed from a game her mother didn't see. Picture the blue lines on the floor plan, sharp and confident, like someone thought permanence was a gift. These images don't fade unless we let them. There's comfort in believing that policies are distant things, decided far from our reach. But the truth is, they live in our neighborhoods, in the rhythm of school bells, in the hum of a shop's door chime that no longer rings. And because they live close, they can be changed close. So tonight, Let the tension in your chest ease, not because the story is over, but because you know where it goes next. Someone will ask you about it. You'll have words, images, numbers ready, and you'll speak not to win, but to widen the room. The night holds still again. This time, the sound you hear isn't boots on gravel, it's the quiet promise that you'll do something before the next knock comes.